Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for this evening's webinar, in which Erin, Gianferrara and Sally Hawkins will talk about a rewilding site that they are working on in the Scottish Highlands, how the site is progressing its rewilding ambitions through social, ecological and digital techniques, and how measurements can show changes to biodiversity and the economic values of natural capital and ecosystem service flows that result from rewilding projects. For those of you who are new to the Yorkshire Rewilding Network or on the webinar for the first time tonight, I just briefly want to introduce a couple of members who are on to the call tonight. So I'm John Hartshorn, and facilitating the questions and answers is our network chairperson, Jeff Davitt. So Jeff's going to come on at the end and hopefully deal with all of the Q&A. As you can see, we're using Zoom. You're all muted and all your cameras are off. I just want to reassure you. But we'd be certainly very happy for you to submit questions during tonight's talk using the Q&A button that you should see in the Zoom window below. Not the chat button, the Q&A button is the one that we're going to use. Jeff's going to monitor that Q&A, see which questions are coming in. He'll grab them and he will put them to Erin and Sally at the end of their talk. Now, before I hand across to Erin and Sally, I just want to give you a very brief overview of the Yorkshire Rewilding Network and where it's come from, particularly for those of you who are new and here for the first time tonight. We're a registered charity. It was launched on August the 1st last year, which I'm sure hasn't escaped you all, is Yorkshire Day every year, August the 1st. And it's been the creation of a relatively small group of volunteer committee members. So the aim of the network is to bring together anyone across Yorkshire who has an interest in rewilding, to inspire everyone, share knowledge and experience, and generally help us all work towards a much more nature-rich and a more sustainable future for the region. So the network's still in its early days, and I'd certainly encourage you to have a really good look through the website, where you should find lots of stories to inspire you, copies of all our newsletters that have gone out to date, some news items that are relevant to the region, and there's also some pages of resources that we think people might find useful, such as book reviews, there's web links, and there's also an events page that will be updated as we build the program of events through 2021. We are planning a number of events this year, although obviously with current lockdown restrictions, we're focused initially on webinars, as you might expect. But I think we can see changes coming, which should allow us to widen the range of events we can facilitate and host as the year progresses. Whatever the events, we will publicize them via the website, Twitter, and in the newsletters. So do make sure you keep an eye on those. And do remember to go to the Join Us page on the website to register to receive our newsletters. There's also a contact page if you have any suggestions for us. And if you are a Twitter user, you can follow the network. We're up over about 620 followers at the moment, and it's growing every day, which is great. Now, we're really keen to provide presentations on rewilding topics of interest across the region. So I'd really like to ask any of you out there, if you have a topic that you'd like to propose you present on, either in its entirety or as part of another webinar, do please get in touch with us. We like to mix it up a little with some rewilding stories, but also some more technical topics as well. And basically anything that it appeals to the Yorkshire area and people of interest, people with a rewilding interest in Yorkshire. So we'd love to hear your rewilding experiences, any project work you might be involved with or have undertaken, topics on rewilding related ecology, and also your involvement and ideas connected to the wider green economy. And it could be that you're a potential presenter from another conservation organization or charity, a community group, a farmer, a student or an academic. We're interested really in anything that's of relevance into rewilding across Yorkshire, whether that be hill, dale, river, coast, town, city, large-scale project, small-scale project. So if you do have something, get in touch. Email is there on the bottom of the slide, and we can discuss your ideas and potentially take it further. And one last thing before I hand over to the ladies, we are a charity, so if you are in a position and would like to make a contribution towards our running costs, please seek out the donate page on the website. Right, so that brings us to why we're all here this evening. So I personally, having studied biodiversity and ecosystem services myself, I'm particularly interested in tonight's topic. So let me introduce the guest speakers. So Erin is an environmental economist at AECOM with a background in natural capital accounting, nature-based solutions and ecosystem service assessments, and is currently the technical lead for AECOM's Natural Capital Laboratory. Sally is a trustee of the Lifescape project and a PhD student at the University of Cumbria, where she is using interdisciplinary approaches to develop a social ecological framework for rewilding. And she's also a member of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's Commission on Ecosystem Management Rewilding Task Force, who recently developed a global recognized definition and principles for rewilding. Okay, that's enough from me. If you're both all fired up and ready to go, Erin, the stage is yours.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Yorkshire Rewilding Network, for having us, and for all the attendees for joining us on this Wednesday evening. I'm just going to attempt to share my screen and the slides now. Hopefully that's working. Great, so we're going to talk to you, as John said, about the Natural Capital Lab. So we have an agenda here. So first I'll give some background to the Lifescape project and the Natural Capital Laboratory, or the NCL. Then Sally will talk us through rewilding and NCL's theory of change and our rewilding plans as well. And then I'll discuss the digital natural capital accounting platform that we've developed as part of the NCL and some of the technologies that we've used to inform that development. And then finally, we'll have a Q&A. So the Lifescape project is a conservation charity. They're aiming to rewild 100 acres of forest among some other various projects that they have in the Highlands of Scotland. So the key aims of that work are to restore native habitats, to reintroduce locally extinct species, and to really get the local population to engage in the natural environment. And alongside that rewilding process, AECOM is running a natural capital laboratory on the site to work as a test bed for testing new and innovative techniques for monitoring, measuring, valuing, and communicating environmental and social change happening throughout the rewilding work. And so we have three kind of main aims for the NCL. So the first one being, we want to trial new technologies to both collect and analyze data. We want to be able to quantify changes in environmental and social indicators over time using various capitals accounting approaches. And we want to be able to communicate the impacts in new and exciting and engaging ways. And so just to provide an introduction to the site, so it's set up on land owned by the Lifescape project, just to the southeast of Loch Ness. The nearest town is called Whitebridge. It's a very, very remote location, and it's downstream from beautiful Loch Killen. And these are just some kind of aerial drone photos that we have to give you some more context about what the site looks like and where it's located. So in the middle one on the left, you might be able to see that there's a river running through one of the kind of side boundaries of the site. And from the pictures, you can also kind of see that there's almost half of the site has been clear felled, and then half of it is quite dense plantation coniferous forest. There's also some broadleaf and woodland mixed in there as well. So there's mixed woodland. It's within the River Fetchland Valley. It was previously used to be part of the Caledonian Forest. So as I mentioned, there's broadleaf woodland, coniferous forest, there's bog, heather, river, birch and hazel as well. We've set up camera traps and have captured red squirrels, badgers, pine martens, deer, and there are many different species of birds on site, including red kites and golden eagles. And just a key point is that there are no salmon in the river on site due to a local hydro dam. And where we're at in terms of progress on the NCL, so we have a 5-year program, and we are currently in year 2. So we have had a bit of a delay because of the pandemic, but we're now kind of fully able to restart all of our activities we have planned for year 2. So these include things like additional site visits and site surveys. We have some preliminary results from environmental DNA analysis, which is really exciting. We're undertaking a missing species study, which I believe Sally will touch on. There's some peatland restoration activities and some art programs and social engagement activities planned, and much more. So now I will hand over. Hopefully that was a really good kind of general intro to the NCL and our aims and objectives. And now I'll hand over to Sally.
Hi, thanks Erin, and thanks everyone for having us here today. Right, let's see if I can share my screen. If that is working. So just to give you a bit more background about the Landscape project, we started in 2017. I'm one of the trustees, and it was when a group of us who were working on the Links project in Kildare realized that we actually had a great team. We had a bunch of people that really had shared passion and vision for rewilding. And one of the great advantages was that we had a very interdisciplinary team. So we had social scientists and ecologists from the University of Cumbria, like myself, environmental economists from AECOM, and lawyers from Clifford Chance. And then a year or 2 ago, one of the trustees, Roger, and his wife Emmy, bought the plot up at Birchfield, which is where the NCL is based. And that's a picture of some of us doing during a volunteering weekend, doing some tree planting. So we have 3 main work streams for the Birchfield project. One of them is to rewild the site. And then we've got a work stream that looks at the kind of more social side of rewilding, creating space for people to engage with the environment. And then we've got a research work stream as well, looking at how we can monitor the impacts of rewilding. I'm going to really focus on the rewilding element this evening because it's kind of the focus of my PhD. And so I'm going to take a kind of a step back and talk about rewilding as a whole, or what we mean when we talk about rewilding at Birchfield. So as John mentioned, I'm part of the Rewilding thematic group. This was put together in 2017. As many of you know, rewilding is quite a confusing term for many people. It has a lot of conflicting meanings. And so the IUCN, Commission on Ecosystem Management, decided to put this group together and commissioned them to look at a definition and principles for rewilding, and eventually guidelines that will be globally recognized. And it's led by Ian Convery from the University of Cumbria and Steve Carver, who is actually at the University of Leeds. So in 2017, we kind of kicked off by doing a literature review. We also did a survey of rewilding pioneers from all over the world, and I'll talk a bit about those results. And then from that, we led on to doing approaching certain influential rewilding organizations to get a list of rewilding principles together. And then we took all of those results to several workshops around the world, and they were attended by a number of over 100 rewilding and restoration experts. And the results of that activity has been published on our website. So far, we have put together a definition for rewilding and 10 key principles for rewilding. And we've also just had a paper that includes all of that information accepted in conservation biology. And I'm happy to share that with you, John, and then you can share that with the network once it's been published. And then ongoing from that, we'll be looking to develop more robust guidelines for rewilding, and principles are still very high level. So just to go back to the Pioneer Survey, the aim of the survey was to better understand the history, evolution and meaning of rewilding from the perspectives of different pioneers from all over the world. We contacted 126 pioneers and we had 60 responses. And these responses really focused on the evolution of rewilding. So rewilding, as it was understood back when people first heard of it, how they understand it now, and how they practice rewilding. So one of the first subjects we focused on was what are the context, what are the drivers and circumstances that led to the creation of this concept of rewilding. So mainly these focused around humans' real impact on the earth and this kind of growing awareness that how we behave as humans was having a very negative impact. Obviously, growing awareness of climate change and the extinction crisis. And alongside that, this awareness that traditional forms of conservation, like protected areas or single species focused conservation, wasn't doing enough to stem that tide. At the same time, there was this growing, emerging ecological thought, so different concepts related to ecology, which led this more holistic approach to conservation. A couple of interesting theories that came about that relate to rewilding include the cascade theory. So this understanding that animals at the top of the food web have a regulating effect on animals below them in the food web. And also the theory of biogeography, which states that animals in small isolated patches of land like islands are actually at a greater risk of extinction. And obviously this applies to protected areas where that might be surrounded by heavily lands that are full of agricultural, like human land use, basically. So also in Europe and North America, you have this increasing urbanization, and that created opportunities for nature to bounce back in areas that have been abandoned in rural areas. And people started to become more aware that of what would happen if humans kind of took some of the pressure off natural areas. So this is just a picture that gives you a very good idea of what I've just talked about. This was developed by Michael Seeley. This is a picture of all the land mammals on Earth. This includes humans. So in the middle, you've got the darker grey, you've got humans. And then the lighter grey squares are all of the domesticated animals, like cows, horses, sheep. And then the green squares show wild animals or wild mammals. And you can see that obviously there's a lot of pressure on the wildlife, and if we were to try and, in order for them to be allowed to thrive, we need to try and reduce some of that pressure. And this hasn't really helped in protected areas, because despite there's been an increase in protected areas over the years, there's actually been a decrease in species abundance. And you can see that by this graph on the right. So because of all those factors, there was this growing interest in this concept of rewilding, and this led to different groups around the world start to talk about rewilding and how they might practice it. So in North America, you have a group in the 80s and 90s, he started to talk about how they can get protected areas to work better for wildlife, and that was by creating connectivity between these areas. And this led to a group called the Wildlands Network, and they wrote a lot about rewilding in Wild Earth magazine, which was their publication. And one of the main articles that came out of that was Sule and Noss's paper in 1998, which describes the 3 C's concept of rewilding. The 3 C's meaning cause, corridors, and carnivores. So they were really looking to focus on protecting areas, being the cause, and creating connectivity between those areas. And then the focus was on reintroducing carnivores, a keystone species, because they argued they were umbrella species, and if we focused on them, it would benefit species below them on the food web. Later in the 1990s, a group within this group, the Wildlands Network, started to talk about functionally replacing species that became extinct during the Pleistocene era. And this was like, they were talking about reintroducing elephants in North America to replace the woolly mammoth, for example. Because this was quite a sensationalist idea, and because it was in Nature, which is very widely read, for many years after that, people actually equated rewilding with reintroducing Pleistocene era or ecological surrogates for Pleistocene era species. The only thing that really was a hangover from that in practice was that actually where it has been practiced is in islands where they have replaced extinct tortoise species with other tortoises. And then in Europe, you have quite a diverse range of groups talking about rewilding. Later in the 90s as well, we have in the Netherlands the concept of nature development, and that was famously practiced by Frans Vera at Spijsplassen. But you have other groups in Europe as well, and the group in the Netherlands eventually led on to create Rewilding Europe, which is very influential across Europe today. So despite the fact that a lot of these groups had different ways of doing rewilding, or at least how that rewilding looked very different in different parts of the world, when we came to look at how we can create a global definition or globally recognized definition for rewilding, we wanted to look at the similarities, and these lay in rewilding aims or intentions. So these are both ecological and social. So in terms of the ecological side of rewilding, which is probably what most people are more familiar with, it's restoring ecological function to the point that ecosystems are healthy, resilient, and self-sustaining. And that reduces the need for human intervention and management. It's also restoring ecological function to the point that nature is self-willed or autonomous, so releasing nature from human dominance, or like trying to reduce the human desire to control or dominate parts of the world. So obviously this is not an easy task, and it requires a paradigm shift in the human-nature relationship. We're talking of trying to create a society that's more ecocentric, so it values all species, not just humans, and we have having an ethical responsibility to try and look after the animals on the planet. We also need to try and find a way that we can coexist with other animals and recognize and value the kind of unpredictability of nature, complexity, that nature is more diverse, and of course we are interdependent with nature. So we came up with this after the work that we did, including the survey and the workshops that we ran around the world. This is the definition that we came up with. So rewilding is the process of rebuilding following major human disturbance, a natural ecosystem by restoring natural processes and the complete or near complete food web at all trophic levels as a self-sustaining and resilient ecosystem, using biota that would have been present had disturbance not occurred. This will involve a paradigm shift in the relationship between humans and nature. And I'll come on to the goal of rewilding in a bit. So we also came up with these 10 guiding principles for rewilding, and I won't go into each one in any detail, but just to point out a few, kind of put some debates to rest anyway, and that is that rewilding is not about excluding humans from the landscape. It requires local engagement and support, and we're looking at incorporating knowledge from different disciplines, different types of people. It's not just about scientific knowledge. And also very importantly, is rewilding is adaptive and it's dependent on monitoring and feedback. And that's definitely something that we've incorporated into our plans. So I understand there's a very, very simple diagram of a theory of change of rewilding. At the NCL, we've decided to use this theory of change model to create our plans for rewilding. It's very much a work in progress, and I don't have a complete theory of change to share with you now. But basically, if you take the definition that we came up with as part of the IUCN thematic group and boil it down to its very essence, you're trying to move an area or a landscape or a system from a very degraded one. So that would be kind of the bottom left of the screen. And the ultimate aim of rewilding is to have this functioning native ecosystem containing the full range of species of all trophic levels. And then, of course, the social side being the coexistence and ecocentrism. Now, I put a few circles on the page there to kind of stand for, I see those as kind of stepping stones. So moving on from wherever area you might be working on, you kind of start to fill in those stepping stones. So you want to be able to get to that point. So it's anyone anywhere really asking themselves, what can we do here and now based on the resources that we have to try and move this area along this continuum towards a rewilded area. So on the top left, you might have something like reintroducing species that can't get them there themselves. You might have encouraging species to return. And then, of course, in order to do that, you'll need to restore habitat. And to restore habitat, and as well as also finding out kind of what you've already got. So what species already there, what habitat we already have. So that's kind of doing baseline surveys. On the social side, you would have, if you're going to have a full suite of species at all trophic levels, you'll have to have people who are willing to coexist with them in the landscape. And how do you get to that point in your system or the area that you're working in? So these are stepping stones, really. And we see Birchfield as one piece in a puzzle. And obviously it's a 100-acre piece of land. It's not going to contain a full suite of species at all trophic levels. So the hope is that once we've worked on the habitat, which has been the focus so far, we'll be able to partner up with other organizations or landowners across the landscape. So in terms of rewilding, as I said, what we've done mainly so far is concentrate on restoring the habitat, and that's been through tree planting, but we're also looking to hopefully restore some of the bog that we have in the area. And then in terms of reintroducing species, the first step that we feel in order to do that is to understand what species we have and then what species are missing from the Caledonian forest. And those are the kind of two things that we've mainly been focused on in terms of rewilding so far. And then on the create side, we're obviously hoping to do what we can to try and connect people with nature and try and move people towards a more ecocentric values where they have a closer relationship and a better understanding of ecological processes. We do have a cottage on the site, which is a big advantage, and we've used that for artist retreats so far. Unfortunately, the pandemic has put a bit of a halt to that, but we're hoping to pick that up again soon. So we're also doing the research side. We haven't really got around to creating a bigger, more robust plan for that yet. We're in the process of creating this theory of change model for the NCL. But one exciting thing that I do have to share is the eDNA survey, that the results from the eDNA survey that Erin mentioned. It's not a very clear picture, unfortunately, but just to note that some of the species are found. So they took the samples from 6 different areas along the river, including some samples from Loch Killen, which is upriver of the Birchville site. And just to point out some of the interesting species that they found using DNA of was the European eel, which is a critically endangered species. They found char brown trout, a common toad, the water vole, and very excitingly, they found some golden eagle DNA as well. I think that's it from me, so I'll just hand over back to Erin.
Great, thank you. I'm going to attempt to share my screen again. So hopefully this is working for everyone. Thanks, Sally. So I'm now going to talk through the digital natural capital accounting work we've done as part of the NCL. But first, before I go through that, I'll give a brief intro into natural capital as a concept. So it's basically just a term that's referring to all of the living
Erin,
and non.
Yeah, we don't see your screen at the minute. Could you just try the reshare again?
Yeah. Is that working?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, thanks. So natural capital is a term referring to all of the living and non-living components of the natural environment, which provide ecosystem services and benefits to people. In natural capital accounting are approaches that have been developed by DEFRA and the Natural Capital Committee as a way of kind of organizing information about natural capital, impacts to it, and impacts to those services and benefits that they provide so that they can be accounted for right alongside traditional financial accounting within decision making. So if you were a land manager or a land owning organization or just an organization that relied heavily on natural resources, these accounts can be used to measure and monitor natural capital assets, their condition, the benefits they're providing over time, etc. And being able to put these impacts into monetary terms a lot of times can help organizations to make decisions about how they manage or fund their natural capital assets. So traditionally, these accounts are Excel-based, they're static, they're quite technical and usually only really accessible to technical audiences. A lot of times the values used within them are literature-based values, so not necessarily reflective or best reflecting what's actually happening on a particular site. And then also a lot of times the habitat data is infrequently updated. And so what we wanted to do through the NCL was to create more engaging kind of automated ways of accessing and presenting information. So we developed in year one of the NCL, a digital natural capital accounting platform, which is the first of its kind. It is web-based, interactive, and accessible. It can be used alongside or incorporating remote sensing and machine learning technology, where you can start to have really kind of sophisticated near real-time updates to these types of accounts. So here are some screenshots for the platform that we've developed for the NCL. I'll show you through an example in a moment as well. So we used a lot of different technology to inform our platform and alongside our platform. So we made use of drone technology and aerial footage. So you can see here we have constructed some flight paths that will be repeated throughout every season over time. And it'll provide really accurate fine-grained time series data for us to interrogate. We also made use of satellite remote sensing imagery, and we're continuing to do so in year 2 and to refine those processes a bit. But this is so that we can kind of further integrate these into the accounting platform, and with the idea that you'd be able to kind of set the boundaries of the site you're looking at, access high resolution satellite data, and then run that through the platform so that it can kind of automatically classify different habitats and their condition on site, and you can monitor those in almost real time or as often as you want. And that can feed into all of the kind of background workings of the natural capital accounting as well. So monitoring the different ecosystem services being delivered and their value and things. So we were also able to develop a digital twin of the site based on the high-res drone footage that we captured. So this is really great because we can digitally alter the site and then run analysis and see what those changes mean for different systems on the site. So for example, you can change different habitats or increase habitats or do make alterations on this and then run hydrological models, for example, and see how altering habitats might change or impact the wider area. And this is great because you don't have to do anything on the ground. You can kind of plan things and assess things before you start any on the ground work. And one kind of final bit of tech we're trying to use and connect to the platform are some immersive rewilding experiences. So virtual reality and soundscapes you'd be able to basically put a headset on or put some headphones in and listen and see how the rewilding activities on the site are likely to change the site over time. So we've been putting together some kind of mock-ups of this VR experience, just to give you an idea of the kind of level of detail that we've been working with. And yeah, we're hoping to be able to integrate these into the platform in the kind of near future. So finally, before we get to the Q&A, I'm going to attempt to show you a working digital platform that we've put together, not for the NCL, but for an agricultural estate in Yorkshire. I thought that might be interesting, considering the network you all are in. So I'll attempt to just bring that up. Hopefully this is working. John, can you just confirm quickly if you can see the website?
Yes, I can see it.
Perfect. Okay. So we've set up a digital natural capital accounting platform for the Barningham estate. We were really lucky to work with Edward Milbank, and he's the owner of Barningham Estate, and GSE Grays, who are their kind of agricultural consultants as well, to put this together. So they're running Defra Elms trial on the site, and this natural capital account is helping them to kind of inform that process. So what is traditionally a kind of series of Excel workbooks is now kind of an engaging website platform. We're able to add photos and videos about the site and about the project. And then we have all of the components of the kind of natural capital account as well. So we have information about all of the different species on site. So this is being a little bit slow. But you can interrogate kind of that data and see where different species have been recorded and see how that, and monitor how that's kind of changing over time. Then we have all of the different components of the natural capital account. So starting with the natural capital asset register, which is basically an inventory of all the different habitats on site, their area or extent, and their condition. And so you can kind of interrogate this data spatially with the maps alongside. I won't try and tempt fate by trying to delve too deep into the GIS components and functionality. But yeah, so the maps kind of go alongside the reporting text we have here. So the next component is the physical flow account, which is where you estimate the volume of different ecosystem services being delivered by habitats each year. And again, you can monitor this over time. So our mapping software will kind of create like these heat maps as we add data each year. So hopefully as different activities are undertaken on the ground, you can see how those are impacting different ecosystem services. Each of the kind of ecosystem services we estimated have their own maps associated and some functionality where you can click and interrogate that data. And then finally, we have a monetary flow account. Similarly, this will act as a kind of heat map and change over time as activities change, as habitats change as well. And so for this particular estate, recreation, obviously food, and also carbon sequestration were the services which had the highest kind of estimated value. Yeah, and so this will be used kind of to inform that trial that they're undertaking on the site. It's not yet been made publicly available, but our digital platform for the NCL has been, and we'll be really happy to share that link with you all so you can have a look at the NCL data at your leisure. So that's all from me. I think we're on to the Q&A now.
We are indeed. Thanks both to Sally and Erin. Sally, I don't know if you want to reappear as well, in case there's any really tricky questions that Erin wants to put your way. We've had a few questions in through the Q&A. Thank you to people who've submitted those. We've got room for a few more if any more come to you. I'll start with the ones most directly relevant to the presentation. There are a couple that are more sort of generic about rewilding network stuff, but while we've got the two of you here. The first couple of questions are related about the 100-acre scale of the site and what limitations that might place on it. And indeed, what area, somewhere like Scotland, you would need to have to be able to introduce kind of all the missing species, whatever that might mean.
Yes, we're well aware that 100 acres is not going to house some of the bigger species like lynx, wolves, and bears. But we're not really near that point at this stage. We do know, I mean, there's been studies done in Scotland that say that there is enough habitat for lynx to survive. But I don't believe a full feasibility study has ever been done that's really comprehensive to be able to say with any certainty. But yeah, so 100 acres is not big enough, but we would be looking in the future to try and partner up with different landowners in the area to create that connectivity between sites.
As far as kind of using new tech and testing out new kind of approaches and experimenting with new things, 100-acre site has been really, really good. So we're able to go into a lot of detail. And I think whereas if we had a much larger site, perhaps the costs of trialing some of these techniques would be prohibitive. We're in a good situation to kind of try these out and report back on the costs and benefits of all these different types of approaches, which is one of the aims of what we want to do with the NCL as well. We want to report back on all of those things, and hopefully us using these technologies can help inform what might be the best practices to use on larger scale sites in the future.
Great, thank you. How did you establish the starting point when I think you said you're in year 2 of 5. What were the kind of initial things you did to give yourselves a start point for the rewilding?
In terms of the setup of the NCL, it coincided with Lifescape's acquiring the property. So yeah, so just quite straightforward. That's when, we got the property, and that's when we started to, I guess, formally develop the plans for rewilding and setting up the NCL alongside. Okay,
thank you. A couple related ones really about the whole capital accounting approach. One of which isn't viewing nature, ecosystems and landscape through the capitalist asset value lens dangerous? Isn't that mindset precisely what is destroying it in the first place? And a kind of similar one that encapsulates it maybe in simpler terms, how do you put a monetary value on a skylark population?
Yeah, I mean, I know that it's a pretty touchy subject, and there are strong views both ways. I mean, this is what I do for a living, and I'm obviously trying to incorporate values for nature into decisions where they're not being incorporated properly in the first place. So I think, so for example, every time a developer buys a piece of land and clear fells it or gets rid of habitats on site or allows them to degrade, they're making a value choice about what's there. They're making a choice that that land is better off, or those trees are more valuable dead than alive. And so even though that isn't explicitly talked about or a viewpoint, that is what's happening. They're making these values, they're making these choices based on a value approach anyways. And so hopefully what we're doing is just helping to kind of better incorporate consideration for nature, habitats, and the services that they provide, vital services that they provide, just to help those decisions, be a little, more environmentally and socially friendly. I will say, I know that it's not perfect, but I think it gets us to a better place, hopefully.
And just to add to that, rewilding is about creating transformational change. We're talking, and it's not going to happen anytime soon. We're looking into the distant future. And this is similar to, if anybody's read the Scottish report recently, it's about trying to change our whole system so that it is better for nature. And there are issues with natural capital accounting, but at the same time, it is the best tool that we have at the moment. And I must say that working with AECOM, they actually are very open-minded and look, and the hope is that they can actually try and challenge that system and try and make it better. And so that's not so human-centric.
Okay, thank you. It is a tricky subject, that one, so that's really helpful responses. Thank you. Some more now about kind of the different species on the site. What are the plans for creating trophic webs or cascades on the site, and how do you decide sort of which species should be there and what's feasible to have there?
So we are at very early stages at the moment. The first step that we see is really to find out what is there already, or what has the likeliness to come back on its own accord if we were to improve the habitat. So we're actually in the in the process of putting together that missing species report, and we're basing that on the Caledonian forest ecology ecosystem. And then the next stage after that, once we have a list of what species are missing, would be to look at which of those would be more effective or the best. And you know, there could be some that are quite easy to reintroduce, like if there are insects and they're unlikely to have any negative impacts on the wider landscape. And then but we'd also be looking at bigger animals that would be a lot more complicated. But yeah, we're not quite there yet.
No, I think it's important, and you've mentioned kind of the involving people and the sort of more social aspects of it. Yeah. What do the local population think of the project, and particularly the prospect of new species introductions?
Yeah, to be honest, at this point in time, we haven't had a lot of opportunity to really interact with the local community. It is a very isolated piece of land. There isn't a big human population around there. But that is something that we really want to kind of kickstart once we can go back and start to actually interact with people so far. But at the moment, we're actually just putting together a stakeholder analysis of who is in the area and what organizations and businesses are running in the area.
So would you believe that our key kind of local engagement activities were all planned for 2020? So we that quite quickly, got halted and delayed. So we have to pick that up again when, you know, we're back to our new normal.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple sort of related to almost choices between species. So one is kind of what's the rewilding approach to invasive species, and the other is wasn't clear whether you've got some kind of monoculture conifer plantations on the land. Maybe one approach would be to fell them and put something else in place, but maybe they are great habitat for pine martens. How do you cope with all those contradictions?
It's constant kind of negotiation, really. We have clear-felled some of the area, but we've actually made the choice to leave some of the coniferous woodland in place because it is good habitat for some of the existing species like pine marten, which we have found on the site. In terms of the invasive species question, it's a very interesting one because again, there's no real clear rewilding answer to invasive species, and I think it depends very much on the particular context you're talking about. So, for example, in Australia, where the invasive species are a very big problem, rewilding does include managing invasive species. But just to bear in mind that rewilding actually is trying to reduce some of that human management. So if you can find a natural way to control invasive species, that would be a lot better. But if those invasive species are really going to outcompete some of your local species, then that would be a decision to make. But I mean, if you look at grey squirrels, for example, they've done some studies to show that in areas where they've reintroduced pine marten, there's been a major reduction in grey squirrels. So that's just something to bear in mind.
Yes, perhaps it just shows there's no one right answer, but a range of things, and people are always involved in the discussion around those choices. Just going back to the natural capital accounting, how do you decide some of the financial values? So, for instance, per tonne of CO2 sequestered and so on. How do you assess how much is being absorbed and how do you value it?
So each ecosystem service has its own kind of method and its own kind of evidence base. In general, it's all based on scientific evidence, and then values kind of range. Those are from either scientific journals, scientific evidence, or market data. So what we have been using as kind of a best practice guidance book is the ENCA guidance that DEFRA developed, so the Enabling Natural Capital Approaches guidance. which is a really good resource for all different kind of methods and data sources for estimating all ecosystem services. Also really good reference for assessing condition of different natural capital assets as well. So yeah, it depends on the service. We're following guidance and in particular that ENCA guidance for looking for our values and things, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. There's one here, a suggestion that you might respond to rather than a question. How about ring barking some conifers to leave deadwood, as they've apparently done in Ennerdale? Is that something you're considering on the site?
I don't know. I'm actually not an ecologist or a botanist, so I don't know. It's not something I've come across before.
Well, you have now, so there's
Okay, I'll look into it. Yeah, thank you.
It sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
Sorry, just going back to your comment, Erin, about some of the guidance. I think you mentioned ENCA guidelines. What's that, please?
So that was published by DEFRA. I believe it's updated quite frequently. It's called the Enabling a Natural Capital Approach, ENCA, ENCA guidance.
Right. There you go. I think that answers the question very neatly. We're nearly out of time, so I'll just turn to one other question, which is probably more for me than the two of you. The first question we had in was, why have people not heard of the Yorkshire Rewilding Network in Sheffield? We started 7 months ago. Most of the people involved and a lot of the contacts we have are further north and west in Yorkshire. And we've been trying to work out how to spread. Principally in Yorkshire, although we're very inclusive and we'll welcome people from anywhere. So we have more recently had probably the most frequent contact we've had of people looking to get involved with the network and volunteering here actually from Sheffield. So we are getting a bit more traction there as we just put the message out and ask people to share it, whether through Twitter or other networks they're involved with. So please keep doing that. Further east is actually our biggest gap now. We've got a few contacts in the North York Moors, but over towards Holway and the Wolds, we're really still quite thin on. So if you know people over there that may be interested, do please share the links with them. Other than that, I'd just like to thank again Sally and Erin for sharing their knowledge of the project. And it's early days, I guess, of year 2 of 5 with a year of it severely disrupted. Both the kind of physical on the ground bit and the ecology, and then the accounting parts of it do sometimes cause controversy and certainly have differing views and tensions, but seems to be the way with all parts of rewilding. So, you know, the discussion is really valuable. So thanks for your contribution to that.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Our next webinar is Tuesday, the 30th of March. There'll be a presentation by Chris and Helen Neve of Make It Wild. So registration details are on our website. Please join us again. And if you've got suggestions, either of things you'd like to see presented, if you'd like to get involved with us more on a volunteering basis, or you've got stories yourselves to share, please get in touch via the website and we'll be happy to pick up with you. So thanks again. This has been recorded, and if you missed part of it or you've got friends that have missed it, it'll be on the website in the next few days. But thanks for your time this evening, and keep rewilding. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.